The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Iván Duque Márquez, President of the Republic of Colombia. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Iván Duque Márquez, President of the Republic of Colombia, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Muy buenos días.
A very good morning to you, delegates. President of the General Assembly of the United Nations Organization, Abdullah Shahid, Secretary General of the United Nations Organization, Mr. Antonio Guterres, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and heads of missions. Today, once again, we find ourselves in this global forum, which historically has been a forum that is vital for the development of multilateralism, the building of peace and solutions to the threats facing our shared world. We are doing this year in the face of a cruel pandemic that is assailing our health systems, our economies, our achievements in the area of equality, and our progress on the 2030 agenda. However, above all other considerations, we are meeting here once again in this historic hemicycle, reminded as we are of mankind's weakness, and at the same time recognizing the stature and the abilities of the human race, which is able to overcome the greatest challenges. COVID-19 crashed abruptly into our lives. It changed our daily lives, our interactions, and it carried away our loved ones. This deadly virus has tested our emotions to understand today more than ever before just how important the embrace of a father or a mother is, just how much it means to share time with family, just how fulfilled we feel following an unexpected friendly encounter. This fate has threatened our education, our health, our economy. The technology of the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, cloud computing and its applications have revealed to us that progress in the virtual world are opportunities for human development. The pandemic has shown our strengths and has also shown our weaknesses. We have seen shortcomings in multilateralism, in responding effectively and in a coordinated way during the most critical times. The divides existing between nations with regard to the process of vaccination are unprecedented. While some nations are acquiring additional doses for 6 or 7 times the size of their population and are also announcing third booster shots, others have not even been able to inject one single dose of hope in their population. The pandemic has worsened other crises as well, the effects of which are just as threatening. We are witnesses to the greatest effects of climate change and the greatest inequalities brought on by economic recession and by migration crises, where we see people who are prepared to risk their lives for decent work, a plate of food, and at the same time they're fleeing dictatorships and shameful regimes. The pandemic has also clearly shown the effect it can have on peace building and the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. This reality makes it possible for me to share with you Colombia's reality and share with you together actions that we need to undertake together, undivided. We need to think together about the future of humanity. In our country, we have confronted the pandemic on 3 fronts: health, care for the most vulnerable, and the reopening of our economy. We are making progress in our national vaccination plan to cover, as a minimum, 70% of our citizens. We are part of the COVAX mechanism, assuming regional leadership in coordination with the World Health Organization and the Pan American Health Organization. Today, I call upon the international community to strengthen multilateralism in the area of health and to make progress in the fair distribution of vaccines. Delegates, this is our moral duty. If we maintain the delays in fair distribution of vaccines for all countries, then we are being exposed as humanity to new variants attacking us with even more ferocity. Global herd immunity requires solidarity so that some do not hoard supplies to the expense of the needs of others. And in attending to the most vulnerable, we have acted with determination and creativity, inspired as we are to resume the path of the 2030 Agenda. We are proud to say that it is the government of Colombia that has implemented the most ambitious social agenda of the century and perhaps in our recent history. By December 2022, up until December 22, we will maintain a basic emergency allowance called the Solidarity Income, covering more than 4 million vulnerable homes, providing direct economic support to more than 25% of our population. In addition to that, we have created an employment subsidy protecting more than 4 million formal workers, and a scheme for reimbursing VAT to more than 2 million vulnerable homes, correcting the historic regressive effects of this tax. And to this unprecedented social agenda, we have added a payment of 25% of the cost for hiring young people, equivalent to Social Security. And today this has become a policy of state, reaffirming the implementation of a genuine social transformation forever, providing free university education on an ongoing basis to the most needy and to the emerging middle class in our country. These achievements are part of the effort at fiscal responsibility and enable us to defend our social achievements. We have brought about the most important social reform of the century in Colombia, and also the approval of the most important tax reform, which, when it comes to tax collection, accounts for 1.8% of our GDP, thus strengthening our ability to service our debt and reduce the deficit, establishing a clear pathway to stabilize public finances and ensure a broad social protection. This has been an effort, a collective effort, achieved without populism and without demagoguery, and without affecting the competitiveness of our businesses. These achievements in the area of health, social care, and fiscal stability are part of the commitment to Colombia, which is our agenda for renewal. With private investment, public investment, and public-private investment, we have seen economic gains, which have achieved the best growth indicators on a quarterly basis this year. And undoubtedly, this is the best growth quarter that we've had in this century. And it also shows the way forward towards growth of more than 7% in this year of 2021. That will give us the greatest growth of the century. This new deal in Colombia is the best way to recover from the pandemic and what it took away from the 2030 Agenda. And also it brings us towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Delegates, heads of state, today I am making a global call. Many countries are facing the threat of COVID, and emerging countries have had to increase their debt and fiscal deficit. Many of them have not undertaken the necessary fiscal reforms to be able to pay for emergency spending, and others have been evaluated by rating agencies with the eyes and criteria that were pre-pandemic. Well, given the high levels of debt and the needs which exist, what we need is a global consensus led by the International Monetary Fund and multilateral development banks, which would establish new fiscal minimum risk criteria during the post-recovery period. If we don't do this, then in the short term, given the demand for debt and an generalized increase in capital costs, what we could see is a debt crisis which will bring with it greater setbacks and global recessionary effects. All of these challenges and actions that we are addressing today are also occurring amongst the greatest challenge for humanity, namely the climate crisis. Given this challenge, Colombia is acting with determination and with moral commitment. We are a country which only represents 0.6% of global CO2 emissions, but we find ourselves to be the most threatened by the effects of climate change. Our action requires commitment, boldness, and that we exercise leadership by example. And that is why we will be coming to Glasgow to COP26 with a commitment to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 51% by 2030. And also, we will be attempting to become carbon neutral by 2050. And this work has already begun, and this is confirmed by our rapid energy transition, which has its own legislation, which we are expanding exponentially to include renewable and non-conventional energy in order to multiply by a factor of 20 our available capacity, and ensure as well zero deforestation by 2030. And that going hand in hand with the development of the circular economy, the harnessing of the hydrogen cycle, and above all, the total and unrestricted defense of the Amazon. Limited fiscal stability resulting from the impact of the pandemic, for many, will become an obstacle to achieving a lot of the goals unless we develop global tools. And for this purpose, I propose to the global community that for a certain period of time, and with the support of the International Monetary Fund, we establish a rule according to which the expenses and investments on structural climate change can be considered apart from the traditional accounting lines for measuring fiscal deficit. These tools, just like the multilateral debt alleviation and pardoning schemes, together with other successes in the area of climate change, should be applied as soon as possible, and delegates, they should be applied unconditionally. By addressing urgent investment needs, however, we cannot be held hostage to political debates relating to conflicts with regard to allocation of resources. Action is required now, immediately, and it cannot be postponed. Our region of Latin America and the Caribbean needs a strengthening of green funding, which urgently requires the capitalization of the Inter-American Development Bank and also of the CAF, the Development Bank of Latin America. And this needs to happen with other tools. Colombia is facing the pandemic and climate change, and is also addressing the worst migration crisis affecting the planet, the crisis of millions of Venezuelans fleeing the narco dictatorship and infamy. Our work with the United Nations Organization and the Office of Dr. Filippo Grandi, High Commissioner for Refugees, has shown great progress, such as providing temporary protection status to more than 1,200,000 Venezuelan migrants living in our country. We undertake this challenge not being a rich country and at an enormous fiscal cost. This situation requires that through the donor conferences that have been established, we now need to see the disbursements of the commitments of the international community, and I urge you to do that. And here I pause to state the following clearly. The dialogue between the interim government of Venezuela embodying democratic resistance and the narco-dictatorship, although those talks do give some hope, should not allow us to become dewy-eyed, because the only effective outcome to this situation is the holding as soon as possible of a presidential election which is free, transparent, and involving meticulous international observation. Any solution which perpetuates the shameful dictatorship and which allows the regime to gain time will only exacerbate the humanitarian disaster that our continent is experiencing. The end of the dictatorship is the only viable way to move forward for the well-being of the Venezuelan people. It should, above all, be the purpose of international action. On the other hand, Colombia is also advancing on peace building within the law. Not even the effects of this cruel pandemic of COVID-19 have been able to move us away from our commitment to fulfill our commitment to a country that wants to put an end to drug terrorist violence. The peace agreement signed in 2016 with the FARC terrorist group today has made significant progress, which allows for the process of reintegration of former combatants who are now becoming legal, and that's been verified by the UN Observer Mission in Colombia. And also, thanks to our commitment to the development plans with a territorial focus and our concentration on areas most affected by violence. And because of this, the Ombudsman's office in Colombia has stated that over the last 3 years of our government, more progress has been made than during the first 20 months of implementation. In this framework, we are moving towards greater investment in tertiary roads, to the greatest certification of properties in our history. We're moving towards the implementation of a multi-purpose land registry with an agenda of fairness in the purchase of rural produce without intermediaries, which has meant that we've been able to have the greatest agricultural commodities exports recorded in our history. Even so, the challenges are many, because of the dissident behavior of the FARC or the ELN and other criminal groups who have never chosen the path of peace, and they persist in their attacks on social leaders, environmental leaders, and those in the process of reintegration. Despite all of these challenges, peace within the law has shown us that we can have great reasons for optimism. We have seen the lowest rates historically of homicides of the last decades, and also the lowest rates of kidnappings since we began collecting data for these atrocious crimes, without losing sight of the fact that drug trafficking does feed violence, and we have to fight it firmly. We have managed to seize the greatest number of alkaloids in the history of the country, and the greatest manual eradication of illegal crops. We are advancing with determination, but we still have to make a difference by acting together. In Colombia, more cocaine means less peace and less environment. Every gram of cocaine consumed in nations which activate demand signifies a homicide or an ecocide in Colombia, because for each hectare of cocaine, we are destroying hectares of forest. Addressing this worrisome rise in the consumption of narcotics is a matter of urgency, and the time has come for the international community to share its responsibility. Fighting crime and lawful peace building means that we must progress with regard to zero tolerance in the conduct of members of the forces of law and order, and we must continue to take firm steps towards structural reforms of the national police. And in their hands, strictly defend human rights. We have patriotic forces of law and order, and their mandate is always to work with the Constitution and human rights in mind. The realities that we face also require us to constantly strengthen democracy so that it can be the antidote to those who attempt to threaten through hate and who seek social divisions. What we can do for a safe democracy is to guarantee a better future. In Colombia, young people have taken a heavy hit from the pandemic, and today it is they who lead the great debates on climate action, proposing collective policies and actions. With them, we have signed a pact for a genuine change in policy that will benefit them. In December of this year, there will be the first election, an open and popular election, to make up the municipal youth councils. This is an unprecedented initiative in the Latin American region, and this will validate the views of our young citizenry with an effective path to ensuring that proposals prevail over protests. This, delegates, represents great determination on the part of Colombia, and we're not going to fail because we want these young empowered citizens to demonstrate our genuine capacity for democratic change. Delegates, this is the last time that I will be addressing you as the President of Colombia. In 2018, I explained to you our agenda of lawfulness, entrepreneurship and fairness. And in this year, 2021, we have demonstrated that despite the situation imposed by the pandemic, our agenda is moving forward. It has become a state policy and it is fact-based. Colombia of mass vaccination is moving forward. Colombia of the reopening of the economy in a safe way is moving forward. Colombia has the greatest social budget of its history. Colombia is moving towards energy transition and climate change. Colombia is moving forward with fraternal migration. Colombia of peace with truth, justice, reparation and not repetition is also on a path of clear action. Delegates, this is the Colombia that has gender equality in the cabinet. It is the Colombia that also wants to contribute to the modernization and reform of this great multilateral organization to make it more permanent and closer to the needs of citizens. We know that we have very many challenges to navigate, very many obstacles to overcome, but we have this great nation which reflects and thinks globally in order to be an example and to generate progress. This is Colombia which believes in multilateralism and which invites the community to common action. This is the Colombia which solves the problems of democracy in democracy, which looks adversity in the face, knowing with certainty that it can be turned into an opportunity, and which will never gives up and will never give up, whatever the storm. The Colombia of good people, honorable, hard-working people, that is part today of this global movement. And action on climate change today is action for fraternal migration, and that requires that we all act together and we can no longer wait. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Colombia for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency.